Welcome to Hashkafa with a Heretic, where we explore the works of Hashkafa that are often recommended to people with questions of Emunah to lay our doubts and keep us on the Derech. I blog as the second son, and I'm your heretical host. Are there really answers to all the questions? Are kashis really terutzim? Are we stark apikorsum or stam amaratzim? Let's find out.
This week's guest is Roy Frankel.
My name is Roy Frankel. I was a very young Baal Teshuva at the age of 12 and been religious until about 22 years old in Chabad society, so in the Lubavitcher community. And today I'm an atheist. I'm an atheist, agnostic, and skeptic.
This is episode 5 of Hashkafa with a Heretic, covering the Chovos HaLevavos, chapters 5 and 6. In this week's episode, we discuss Rabynu Bachaya's speculative Neoplatonic metaphysics and his Aristotelian physics. Chapter 5 is the Cosmological Argument, and Chapter 6 is the Argument from Design. He tries to prove that there must have been a first cause, and then jumps to the first cause being God. And then he says that only an idiot would think that the world doesn't have a designer, and that it must have a designer. So we talk a bit about the argument from design and how it simply isn't true that the world that we see necessarily points towards designer. Start with chapter 5 here in the Chovos HaLevavos. I think this is the cosmological argument, so that should be interesting.
Yes.
He's going to start actually trying to prove what that there is a God and who created the world and so on and so forth.
Exactly.
Chapter 5. There are 3 premises which lead to the inference that this world has a creator who created it from nothing. 1, a thing cannot make itself. 2, beginnings causes a limited number. Therefore, they must have a first beginning, which had no beginning before it. And 3, anything composite must have been brought into existence. Okay, so one is a problem that really only applies to things that we know of, right? We see things. This is an argument as it's usually put. Rashi, for instance, says, I forget the exact wording, but something like how a wall attached to the mason and so on. But this is an artifact of the world we live in, right? We've never seen the universe be created. We only see things being made from other things. So nobody creates rocks out of thin air. You take rocks and you make it into a wall.
We're definitely not familiar with the concept of creating something from nothing because, as you said, it's nothing that we have seen. We're talking about things that we have seen and things that we can witness, which is, as you well said, it's not really possible to have seen the universe being created. So that would be an interesting bridge to make. Yeah.
Right. It's. I don't think it's a valid inference from
Absolutely.
things in this world to the world itself. I'm interested to see what he says for number 2, why he thinks that they have to have a limited number. Unless he's just talking about infinite regress, right? That everything is caused by something else, and you follow it back far enough, you have to get to the first cause. That might be
okay.
it. And then 3, I think, is a purely Neoplatonic thing, that all composite things must be created by the unity, which is something that he's been talking about since the beginning. All right, so let's see what he has to say.
I think that the main thing that I see in those 3 arguments, and I was thinking a lot about it today. So some of it is a little bit beyond my field of understanding, or I'm not very familiar with quantum physics and quantum physics, and etc. But
to be fair, neither was he.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty clear. That's one of the observations that I was going to make. That is pretty clear. And also in the way that these things are argued, it's a very abstract way. And as you said, for number 2 and for number 3, and even for number 1, I mean, those 3 arguments, they will tie into the very question that I'm not sure if it's mentioned around in the reading, I don't remember it. Who created God? I mean, if God is a composite thing and if God is the creator, so who created that? I mean, how did that come into existence? And then we just go into this circular, abstract, kind of, pardon my French, mental masturbation kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And we really don't get it. We really don't get very far with those ideas.
Right. Well, that's always a problem with the cosmological argument, is that in some formulations it's just a special pleading, right? Everything needs a cause, and that cause is God. And God doesn't need a cause because, well, God is different.
Exactly, because God is exceptional, because God is God. But there is one thing that I find interesting is, it's something I learned a long time ago, and I'm not sure who said it, and there is favorite post, but it's about the letter base and the ratius, and why it's letter base and not aleph to begin the Torah. So the idea was that you cannot ask anything before the ratius. So I think that the very Torah opens kind of this door to questioning, okay, so what happened before the creation, which means what happened, how did this idea of God came into existence? All those questions are kind of, forbidden. Don't ask that. It's not your place to ask. You're not going to be able to understand, and so forth. So.
Right. I think there might be something to that in the sense that I don't think we can know what happened before the world came into existence. We just don't have access to that. But that's a different thing than forbidding it.
Oh yeah,
right.
That's correct.
We can't know what happened before the Big Bang because it's outside our universe. We can't get at it.
Mm-hmm.
But we can speculate. We can think about it. It's interesting.
Absolutely.
Right. Proof of these three premises is as follows. Proof of first premise. Anything that exists after it had not existed cannot escape one of two possibilities. Either it created itself or something else created it. If it created itself, then it cannot escape one of two possibilities. Either it created itself before it existed or after it existed. Both are impossible because if we suppose that it created itself after it existed, then it did nothing since it was not necessary to make itself because it already existed before doing anything else. Therefore, it did nothing. If we suppose it made itself before it existed, at that time it was absolutely nothing. And that which is nothing cannot perform any action or preparation, potential for action, because nothingness cannot do anything. Therefore, it is impossible for something to make itself in any way. Yes.
Okay.
But that applies to God just as well as it does to universes.
Once again.
Right? Unless we're talking about something that's eternal. Which, oddly, I think at the time, until fairly recently, the generally accepted model of the universe was that it had always existed. And this goes way back. This goes back to Aristotle and Plato, which he bases a lot of his ideas on. So
absolutely.
We'll see how that develops. Proof of the second premise is as follows. Whatever has a limit, is finite, must have a beginning, because it is evident that something which has no beginning has no limit, since it is impossible for a man to fathom the limits of that which is without beginning.
Okay.
I think he's conflating different things here. Unless he's specifically talking about time, right? Something could be, theoretically, could be finite in space and infinite in time, such as a steady state universe.
Absolutely.
But he seems to assume it's either or. Either it's completely finite or completely infinite. Therefore, that which is found to have a limit, we know that it must have had a beginning, a first beginning, which had no beginning before it, and a starting with no starting before it. And when we consider the finite character of all the beginnings found in the world, we must conclude that they had a first beginning with no beginning before it, and a first starting with no start before it. So there cannot be an infinite chain of non-eternal beings.
The question is just why? Why would that not be possible to have an infinite chain of non-eternal beginnings?
Well, I think that's right. You can't have infinite regress, right? At some point you have to get to something that started it all.
Yes, okay.
He's saying that we see everything in the world has a starting point, and therefore there must have been some ultimate starting point. But that's not really, we see everything, again, it's like the wall and the rocks, right? Everything in the world has a starting point in the sense that it changes from one thing into another. We never see anything new.
New or original. And this is, once again, moving to that abstract idea. If we're going to talk, for example, in terms of science, at this point in time, there are observable factors that we can see in the universe, and I believe that scientists have been studying for many years and are studying today. But those examples of what we can see in the world to have a beginning and therefore something needs to have an original beginning is not observable in this sense. We cannot compare that to the creation of, like you said, something completely new.
So I'm not sure why he can't just end at an eternal universe that, like you said, there's nothing new. Just things change. Second proof that beginnings clauses must be finite in number. This is a very different way of deriving knowledge than I think what we're usually used to. This is a purely abstract argument.
Absolutely. That's what I'm thinking all the time, that this goes back to, it's not just an abstract argument, but to abstract ideas that are completely, for example, undoubtedly finite. If it's comprised of parts, it's why is it, and I understand that it makes this kind of circular argument in terms of, if it's a part, it cannot be, but why is it so? Why is that, once again, why is it that this is the undoubtful definition that he's coming to,
Right. He's making an assumption here that if you take a part from an infinite and then either that must be finite, or if it's infinite and you put it back, then it becomes finite. Or maybe you take a part from an infinity and it's also an infinity and you put it back and it's still an infinity, because an infinity is an infinity by definition. We don't know. We've never tried it. But that's not how he thought.
Yes, exactly, which is a complete it's completely inside of the mindset. It's not, it's like you said, it doesn't change the features of the infinite. If you take a part of the infinite, it continues to be the infinite, and that part may be finite, but the infinite continues to be infinite, and when you put it back, it continues to be infinite. It's not going to change because of one part, which is another way to look at it, which is perhaps the way that I see it, right? Which, by definition, the infinite may have parts, but it will continue to be infinite, undoubtedly so.
Yeah, I mean, this is just assumptions that he's making, that this is how it works. And, I mean, well, even for us, there's no way to test something like this. But,
Exactly.
I don't think he's necessarily right. He might be, but we have no way of knowing.
I actually think that, in this case, it's necessarily nothing. I mean, it could be right, it could be wrong. I'm not sure that, if it's not observable, and if it's just an hypothesis that comes out of the person's mind, so it's very abstract. It's completely abstract. But my definition of infinite certainly does not conform to this idea of infinite that he's putting out there.
Yeah, I think that's what it comes down to the definition of terms, and he came up with a definition, and then he's working off of that. But there's no justification for that definition.
Exactly. Yeah.
I'm not sure he came up with this definition. This was what everyone knew, quote unquote, that this is what infinite means.
Yes, which makes perfectly good sense because it's, in terms of logic, it's perfectly logical and
right.
It makes sense.
On its own terms, right? It makes sense on its own terms. It's only when you step outside and say, "How do you know that?" You start having problems.
Exactly.
Chapter 6. Here, I think he's making a jump already. He's right. He's jumping from the first cause as the creator with a little c to the first cause as the creator with a big C. Right. The prime mover to God.
There must be a God. Yes, that bridge is there, but we don't see really how it's bridging. Correct.
I think that there is something that caused the world to come into existence. I don't think that's controversial at all. I mean, religious, not religious, right? There has to be some cause somewhere, somehow, but that is a triomni God who cares about what people do and gave us the Torah and Hashkafa and so on and so forth. So that's an unjustified leap.
Absolutely. I have been speaking with a few people on coincidentally about this subject when they say even if you don't believe in God, you're going to believe that there is something, even if it's not the God that I believe in, if it's not the fashion that I believe in, I'm going to believe that something at least caused or created this universe. And then you said, just right now that there must be a cause. And this is once again the part that we can infer things from what is observable. And this is where I am lacking sufficient knowledge to really go into the details, but I am pretty sure that intuitively it's almost unimaginable that there is no cause in general. But I even think that could be disputable. But yes, from that there is a cause to there is this creator, those are, I would say, completely different things.
Mm-hmm. So you think that there might not be a first cause. So then what would we have? Just an eternal universe?
It's very difficult, I think, for us to really conceive what is infinite and what is eternal. And that's actually interesting because this is something that is actually said about God. It's impossible to conceive what is God and etc. But I'm talking really about the concrete world that we know. I think it's very difficult for us to imagine the idea that nothing is new, everything is constantly changing and transforming. It's difficult for us to really imagine that there is no beginning. That part is, I think, unfathomable in a way because our minds cannot, wrap our minds around that concept. But I think it's a possibility.
Something that has occurred to me is that time itself might just be a quirk of the universe that we live in.
Yes.
I don't know if there's a particular reason that there has to be time at all. And without time, the whole question of beginning doesn't start. So the universe so the universe we're in clearly has time, and we can't get, like you said, we can't get our minds outside it because we have no experience with timelessness. But maybe it's possible there's some substrate or wherever our universe arose from. Maybe there's just no time, and we happen to be stuck in this framework.
Yes, and within this framework, then absolutely there has to be a cause, there has to be a beginning, because this is what makes sense in this framework. But that's actually a very well put way to say it.
Because that's always the question is what was before the universe? What was before the Big Bang? And the answer, I've heard physicists say the answer to what was before the Big Bang is that there was no before. There can't be a before because there was no time. Time started at the Big Bang. So conceivably, you could have a universe or a meta-universe that just doesn't have time. And then this whole problem goes away.
Exactly. Which is, in a way, if I'm not mistaken, once again, at the top of my ignorance on the subject, which is something that I think people have made theories about it, and it's not something that we're just, coming up with it. It's a well-known idea that time, like you said, came into existence with the Big Bang, after the Big Bang, and absolutely, if something exists outside of time, then the entire argument just falls apart.
I guess in this scenario where our universe with its time arose from something where time is irrelevant, that would be, in a sense, the first cause.
Yes.
Whatever it is but that's not God. That's just, we don't know what it is. I suppose it could be God. We have no idea. But it's not necessarily God. It's not
necessarily God, but more than anything, it's not necessarily in any kind of order or specific design. It does seem to be, or it could very well be, just whatever cause there was, an extremely accidental and random thing that happened.
Right. Right. Just happens to be that way, and here we are.
Yes. And we do have consciousness, which is interesting, and consciousness itself is an interesting topic, but it doesn't mean that there is an intelligent design whatsoever.
In this world, for our senses and intellect, it appears like a built and furnished house, whereby all its needs are prepared. The sky above like a roof, the land below like a carpet. And this is very much, I think, the worldview of someone who knows that he lives at the center of the universe.
Yes, absolutely.
This is someone who never saw the pale blue dots from Voyager as it turned around at the edge of the solar system.
Yes, absolutely. So I think that you're trying to really get into the mindset of the person who wrote this, as you said, a while back. But at the same time, right, it is pretty ego-centered, right? It's not that we exist due to those things that happen to happen. It's that those things happen to happen in order for us to exist. And, there is no idea of evolution whatsoever. So that, if the animal is there, it's because it's exactly the animal that we need to eat and so on and so forth.
Honestly, I'm a little jealous. I want to live in a world that's centered around me. How amazing is that?
Absolutely. That would be awesome, right? Yeah.
Instead, I'm stuck with the knowledge that I live on a speck of dust in an unremarkable galaxy in one corner of the universe.
Yeah, this is something that my uncle is a psychiatrist. Has been a psychiatrist for 40 years, and his big influence in my life. And this is exactly that. It's that one of the things that he tells about, when he talks to his patients, and a very interesting way that he put it is that he sells despair. He doesn't sell hope. He sells despair, which means he's trying to give them options. But at the same time, there is that realization that it's not all about us. And it's not all about it. There is a chaos in which we're just playing parts of it, and we have some control, but not a lot of control. And those ideas are not, hopeful. They are kind of disparaging. You kind of feel, oh my God, I am just a speck of dust in the universe. I am nothing. That is definitely not. It's not a consolation for anyone to feel like that. It's just this idea that is stuck in our mind. And yes, how jealous. It's a good way to put it, of a person who can see the world as fabricated for he or she,
When we examine a plant or a live creature, we find them composed of the four elements: fire, air, water, and earth, which are separate and different. And of course, no, we don't. But this isn't to his detriment at all. Everyone at the time believed that. This is Aristotle's physics. He's wrong. Though, to be fair, that doesn't really affect his main point, which is that everything is composed of other things which are composed of other things.
Absolutely. At the end of the day, if you have compounds, it doesn't matter if they're different than what he's mentioning.
It's also interesting that he doesn't talk about the person being made up of parts, his arms and legs and organs and whatnot. It's about the elements.
Yes.
He's trying to get at something more fundamental here.
Yes. Like more basic, as basic as you could, as primary as you could at the time, I guess. Yeah, to be fair, if we're analyzing this as people, to be fair, he didn't know much better at the time, and he doesn't also change his final argument. But the fact that he didn't know that at the time, the fact that this needed to be discovered and observed, that is also kind of like, okay, there is definitely a hole in these completely abstract assumptions due to a lack of knowledge because of the times. So I guess that in a sense, I'm not just saying that should be dismissive. I'm just saying that in a sense that it would kind of, okay, so this is like as far as we can go with this, but that's it. It's limited as an idea, I mean.
Right, so it's not to his detriment that he didn't know it, but he didn't, and so there's only so much that we can, right? That he's wrong isn't his fault, but he's still wrong.
Yes.
We do not have the capability to join the four elements in the natural way we find them compounded in nature, because they are different and even repel each other. If we attempt to artificially combine them, the result rapidly changes and disintegrates. So this is a bit of a tangent, but it's interesting that the more we learn about the way the world actually works, the more we can do things like that. Right? The imaginary, quasi-magical things like the four elements don't actually work. And real elements do. We can combine base elements into other things.
Absolutely.
Even produce new elements in particle accelerators.
Absolutely, yeah. So which is a direct contradiction to, once again, toward the basis of these assumptions.
Since all existing things that we find are from the elements and composed of them, and we know that they were not combined on their own, and by their inherent nature do not join together because of their repelling characteristics, it is clear to us that something else must have joined them and bound them and fused them together by their nature by force. This is their creator who joined them and ordained their union. So here, this reminds me a lot of the argument made by some creationists about how could life have arisen randomly on its own, to which the answer is that it's not random. You get the building blocks of life based on the basic laws of nature, of chemistry and physics, and that runs directly counter to this argument that he's making, that you can't possibly combine the base elements into other things that can't happen by itself. And now we know that, in fact, this absolutely does happen by itself. You get hydrogen fusing in stars and these forming heavier elements which chemically combine, and you get other things and molecules, and eventually, under the right conditions, you can get all sorts of stuff, like planets and people.
Yes.
Which kind of renders this whole chapter kind of irrelevant.
It's interesting to talk about it, and it's obviously interesting to talk about it with someone who thinks, the same as I do. And it's definitely not something that I would have read if it wasn't for your invitation. So in this sense, it's actually interesting to go back and to read it and to see the finest details. But absolutely, it is, at the end of the day, it is quite, I wouldn't say irrelevant. It's just extremely abstract and limited.
Yeah, and based on faulty premises, at least in this chapter.
Yes.
If we investigate the four elements, we'll find them decoded of matter and form. Here I think he's talking, again, this is Neoplatonism, and he was very much a Neoplatonist. So you have the matter, which is the stuff that we interact with, and then you have the Platonic form. The Neoplatonists said there's a higher world where we have the perfect form. This expresses itself through the matter. We have no reason to think that this is true at all.
Absolutely.
So again, this is another thing in this chapter that is really, it's interesting in an academic sense, but doesn't really work as a proof for what he's trying to prove, that there must be a God.
So it is interesting in a philosophical sense. I think that because of the nature of abstract thinking, it is possible to model the thinking around the things that we actually know nowadays and to actually make it fit. Not in a perfect way, but to just make it fit enough so that it sounds logical. But it is definitely not observable and not concrete. But still, as a philosophy or as an academic thought, still, I wouldn't say it's not interesting. For example, the idea that there may be a superior world in which things then manifest themselves. There are philosophies and theories in which we can actually accept that as a concept, but it's, once again, it's not provable or not observable. It would be just an idea that is completely, unfounded.
Right. I agree. As an idea, it's an interesting as sort of a thought experiment, even.
Yes.
But in terms of reality, the best thing you can say about it is that it's not impossible.
Exactly. That's the closest that you could get to an affirmation. I agree.
So this it does follow logically, right? If the premises are true, then like many things in religion, the problem is in the premises. I think even the most mystical, irrational concepts that have worked their way into Judaism, the conclusions are logical if you accept the premises. I don't think most people are not actually irrational. They don't believe in ridiculous things. They just believe things based on faulty premises.
Absolutely. Quite contrary, even the ridiculous idea, even the idea of the word ridiculous is subjective. So absolutely, this is not illogical. It's just that once the premises are debunked, like you said, there is no basis for that. And even if a premise is correct, but it has to prove too many things in order to really reach this conclusion as a solid conclusion for life. But it doesn't mean it's illogical. I actually think that especially Judaism, well, as far as I know, is extremely logical. It's just that the building blocks that require the observation are probably faulty.
I've come across this again and again. I really think that that's how this works. You start with faulty premises that people assume are true, either based on authority or tradition, and then you build on that. And the building works. It's the foundation that's the problem. So we have that here, this whole idea of the four elements and the forms. And if you assume all of this is true, then everything else follows logically. And it's a beautiful logical structure.
Absolutely.
But you pull the foundation out from under it, and the whole thing comes tumbling down.
Then what are you going to do? Yes, absolutely.
And because we have demonstrated that it is not possible for there to be an infinite chain of causes, it must be there the first cause without a previous cause. And he is the one who formed it and brought it into existence from up. And here we jump in one sentence from the first cause to a he.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
There's no, right, like you said before, there's no bridge. There's no. We haven't gotten from some uncaused cause, some prime mover to an intentional being.
I was originally bothered with the word demonstrated because nothing was demonstrated, but it was just, basically thought of. But you're absolutely right. It's just jumping from a creator with a small c and then a creator with a capital C into a he, and yeah, absolutely. Right. And then we have this being formed in front of us. Yeah.
Right, so this bit actually is illogical because that's a non sequitur. You can't get from one to the other.
You could, but that is definitely...
Well, right. I mean, in theory, you could build that bridge, but he doesn't bother.
Yes, it's not built. Exactly.
So now he has a bunch of proof text, and then he goes on. There are some people who claim that the world came into being by chance, without a creator who created it and a maker who formed it. It is amazing to me how... Here we get to the insult.
Yeah.
It always comes down to that.
Yeah.
It is amazing to me how a rational, healthy human being could entertain such a notion. If such a person heard someone else saying the same thing about a water wheel, which turns to irrigate part of a field or a garden, saying that it came into being to be without a craftsman who designed it, and toiled to assemble it, and placed each part for useful purpose, the bearer would be greatly amazed at him. Okay, so this is what 600 years later would come to be called the watchmaker argument. The famous story about, was William Taylor, you told the story about the man who walks across the heat and hits his foot against something and looks down and sees a watch. And you would not assume that the watch simply came into being on its own. So there's all sorts of objections to that. One is that the watch in itself isn't necessarily more indicative of design than a rock, because a rock is also, it has its particular features. And we only think that the watch is designed because the watch has a purpose, and it only has a purpose that we assign to it. But theoretically, somebody might have made the rock or something. And there's also the problem that we don't know that the watch is designed because it's complex, or in this case, the water wheel, right? We don't know that water wheels are built by people because we look at it and it's complicated. We know it's built by people because we've watched people build them. And in our experience, every manufactured item has been manufactured by somebody. And we've never seen a universe being made. And and there isn't actually a maker's mark stamped on the universe. Right? Unlike a watch, you turn a watch over and on the back it says it has the name of the company. So there is. Did you ever read The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy?
Yes, I have.
So do you remember the scene with the giant world building factory, and then he wanders around on one, and he comes to the fjords, and he sees what's his name? Is it Darty Bartplast? Something like that. And he sees the guy's name in the mountains. That's evidence of a manufactured world.
Very interesting. Yes, I do remember that. Yes. Yeah, that would be.
If he found God's name in, say, the universal constants or something like that. Now, that would be interesting.
That would be definitely interesting.
In chapter 5, he presented the cosmological argument. Here he's moving into the argument from design, which is all of this. World is everything works together so nicely. Somebody must have made it that way. What we have brought to establish the existence of the Creator from the aspects of his deed should be enough for anyone who is intelligent and admits the truth. Which, of course, the corollary is that if you don't, then you're an idiot. Right. I don't want to be an idiot, right? So I kind of agree with them. So that's chapter 6.
Yeah, thank you for the conversation.
So thank you for joining me.
This has been Hashkafa with a Heretic. Until next week, keep questioning, and remember that kashas aren't teruts and insults aren't answers, and while there are many good reasons to be from, the obvious truth of orthodoxy isn't one of them.